Smart strategy, real conversations, bigger margins. This is Chasing the Margin podcast.
Welcome back to Chasing the Margin. Today we have Mr. Danny Kelman. Danny, thank you for coming on.
No worries.
So I was a little concerned before we were doing the recording because Danny has some interesting interest that is actually happening today with a little bit about who he is. So Danny, fill us in why I was a little worried about you coming on.
Oh, what with the England game going on. So I think it's still, I actually haven't seen the final score, but I think it's still 0-0 with by the end of the game. So at least I didn't miss anything. I had to leave the game fairly early to get here, but that shows dedication. So
yeah, that's right.
I was like, I'm English. I could never be late for anything. So just seeing that I was like, oh, I'm going to have to leave early. I'd let you know I may be running a bit late, but I was like, no, I can't do that. So try and shake it off, but just can't.
Yeah, so it's a little fun time for the Dallas area with having the World Cup, at least some of the games here in the area, and then Danny being a pretty passionate soccer or football, however you want to call it, fan. So.
No, it's definitely we gotta, and specifically having all the fans in town was great. I was running into English people everywhere, so that's a cool aspect of it, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, a little different than normal, I guess.
Yeah, there was a bunch of English guys in my gym, and I was like, they look lost, you know, for the most part.
So, Danny, obviously, anybody listening can tell you are at least partially from the UK. So
yes.
Give us a little bit of background about who you are and where you're from.
Yeah, so kind of from all over. My dad was born in Scotland. My mom was in Edinburgh, and then my mom was born in like Birmingham, in and around so kind of Peaky Blinders, as nobody knew where it was before that show. But after that show, everybody seems to know where it was. But my dad was military, so we were born in Germany. Interestingly, when the Berlin Wall fell, we were actually in Germany. So as we were there, I was born on American Air Force Base, lived there for the first 4 years of my life. When I was 4, my dad went back to the UK just because it wasn't, we were basically occupying a country. We weren't wanted there, So it's like, so you're literally living on a base and, so it's not the most pleasant of experiences all in all with everything that was going on there at that time. And then lived there till around 6 and then moved to the United States when I was 6 years old initially. Lived here in Texas, Orange County, California. So that's why I always joke that I'm more laid back of an Englishman, for the most part. And people find this crazy. I had an American accent at this point. So I did actually have an American accent. My parents divorced when I was 11, and I moved back to the UK, and that's where my accent came back in. And then I moved back out here when I was 16. In England, when you're 16, you're an adult, so you can move wherever you want. And then I moved back here, lived in LA, and then moved to Frisco when I was like 17. So I've lived in Dallas quite a while now. So I always like, specifically in real estate, people are like, well, do you know where you're talking about? And I'm like, no, I've lived here 20 years now. So I've kind of gotten the lay of the land for the most part.
Yeah. So is it people in the UK think you have a weird accent? Because
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Everybody thinks I have a weird accent. I did a speech one time in Liverpool, which their accents are weird anyway. And a guy thought I was from South Africa. And I was like, so I get Australian a lot. But I feel like that's what happens when you blend an English accent with a Southern drawl is literally the Australian accent. So, so I'm like, that makes sense,
Yeah. So also, do you remember at all when the Berlin Wall thing happened?
No, not at all. It's just timeline-wise, I didn't realize it till years after. I was like, I was there. I was like, that was a pretty cool fact,
Right.
That is, the only thing I do remember is we left. The reason we left Germany is because we used to every day have to check our car for bombs. And then one time we went to go on the go-karts or the dodgems or whatever you call them, depending on which country. And I checked it for bombs, and my dad was kind of like, it's probably not the best way to bring up a child, because it was kind of still, tense time. So I remember that being on guard, living there, but not like any particular events or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that's like a pretty interesting two truths and a lie type situation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. 'Cause I was there then, don't remember it, you know?
So, Danny, obviously you've moved around quite a bit,
Yep.
and then you've been in Dallas for a long time, and you kind of mentioned it, but tell me what you're doing now and tell the guest.
Yeah, so I think it's 6 years ago now. I started a real estate brokerage, and my background was always working with businesses. So I produced events. I started my first business when I was around 19, producing events and things like that. And then I had a marketing agency and a digital agency. So I knew a lot of business owners. And then one of my event friends was like, he got into real estate and was doing really well and was like, you should really, really consider this. You know, what he said was, good people need to be in real estate, because not saying that there's a lot of bad people there, but I feel like good, honest people that just love doing business, as he said, this is the perfect industry for you, dragged me into it kind of kicking and screaming, because I was like, I was already own my own business and doing that sort of stuff. But then once I got into it, I loved it. So I naturally gravitated towards the commercial side of real estate, just because everybody I knew and everybody I'd done business with were already business owners, you know. So that's always, not to say my brokerage does everything from residential to apartments, but the side I mainly focus on is the commercial, and that's pretty much where I started off.
Gotcha. So was it kind of originally the idea that maybe you would do it part-time, or did you just dive headfirst and just stop the other businesses immediately?
Yeah, I did. Well, I did both the businesses at the same time until the level of income took over the one. So it was like a gradual process. And I used to have these really large New Year's Eve events that we had like 5 or 6 of them across the city at the height. And one year I was like, I'm just going to step out of these and just focus on real estate. And then I kind of set a target in my head of what I wanted to do in that time period monetarily, in order to prove to myself like, I can do this all the time anyway. So that was, and then I was trying to get fired by my marketing clients, trying very, very hard to get fired by them. But then there was always a friend who was like, no, we need this, we need that. And I used to have marketing retainers that we do their online marketing for. And then they'd always pop up like, hey, I need help with this. And so I'd always kind of get dragged back into it in some senses. But yeah, so it was like a gradual, slow process of going in 100%, you know. Well, take that back, is I was 100% in on it, but I was doing this thing as well on top. So it was like 120% of my time, you know?
Yeah.
So it was like, I was literally just, I don't have any time in the day, so I'll wake up early at like 6 to get these things done, and then I can go into that. And then, so I've always kind of been trying to be busier than slower, you know, for the most part. So I probably should have stopped doing that stuff a lot sooner than I did. But, you know, I think friends and relationships and, you know, client relationships that you've built up over a long time, is you don't want to let them down, you know, if somebody asks you a favor or needs something. So I still get dragged into it sometimes to this day, just helping people out with stuff, you know. So I probably need to be better at saying no.
Yeah, I think having multiple jobs going on at the same time as a founder is just the normal way of life for anybody who's founded a business.
Yeah, normally, and I think it's just getting up to that is when you do own a business, it's getting up to that point of, you know, survival, right? It's like being able to make the amount of money that you need to make in order to live a nice life. So I think that's what real estate agents struggle with the most. I was really fortunate because I had, you know, repeated income coming in from this other stuff I'd done before, and then I could transition through it, you know.
For sure. So to give a little more context, and you kind of fill in in the spaces that I leave out, but you work a lot in the commercial space, and one of the things that you and I have talked about is not only do you do that, but you specifically work a lot on the leasing side.
Yes.
So I definitely want to cover a lot of questions today in regards to that, because I think you'd have wonderful insight. But with that in mind, I think, at least from my perspective as somebody who's not nearly as knowledgeable as you are on the topic, when COVID happened, I'm sure it kind of like threw things in flux, or at least it changed the way that business was done. So maybe give me a little more context about specifically what you do on the leasing side and like how things have changed maybe in the last 5-6 years.
Yeah, so it started off when I was about 22, 23. This funny story is one of my friends was like, hey, I got this job leasing office space and the people sound like you. And so I got there, and there was this company, it was called officebroker.com, and they leased office space all across the nation. They did it from an office, right? They do it remotely, and they'd be, negotiating all these leases and things like that from this office space. And I got to the interview, and sure enough, the owner of the company was not only where I was from, he went to my school that I went to in England. So
a very strong connection.
Yeah, so it was like really funny because they said, we're going to hire you, but we're also going to absolutely beast you to be the best because you can't let down, So you can't really let down our school. Not that it was a particularly great school by any means, but still it was like, you're from where we're from, you're not going to let us down or make us look bad. So immediately I'd have the other owner like listening to every one of my calls and just beasting me pretty much every day just to get me up to speed. And sure enough, within about 3 or 4 months, I was one of the top people in the company just because I had this immense pressure on me just to do well. So my first ever look at commercial real estate was really on the office side. And then I loved doing that. And then when I first got my license, and because I knew like a lot of nightclub owners, a lot of bar owners, and just really a lot of business owners with like physical spaces. So the first deal I ever did, I got my license week 1, and then somebody reached out to me for help finding a gym. So because of my marketing background, I'm running all the analytics of all the areas through Facebook. Well, that was what was crazy. Somebody said, this is how commercial real estate brokers get their data. And I looked at all the data sources and realized they're about 5 years old. And I'm like, that's absolutely insane. So you're leasing a business now based off of marketing data that's 5 years old, and it's done from surveys. So I was like, this is ridiculous, how they're doing it. So I immediately went, we can just pull all the data from Facebook. There's a reason it's like a largely successful company, because it's the best advertising platform in the world with the most specific amount of data. So this was week 1, of going like looking at commercial real estate and going, this is kind of done a bit, not a bit old-fashioned, crazily old-fashioned. Is I was interviewing with commercial real estate brokerages, and whenever I was talking about the internet, one of the brokers was referring to that. Is that the computer? So that was where I saw this need, and I was like, okay, here's this client that I need to help out. So we analyzed all the data of where they should be and things like that. And because of my online marketing background, I loved doing that stuff. So I ended up, and my broker at the time, I was at like a residential brokerage. I call her like, hey, I need some help with this. And she goes, well, I have no idea what to do. I've never done a commercial deal before, so I was kind of out of luck. So what I did do in real estate is I found specific mentors, people that were doing very, very well in those said areas, and learned from them, And this, funnily enough, a lot of it I was actually doing in COVID. Because when COVID stopped, there was these brokers that needed help doing stuff, but a lot of people weren't going to work or they weren't wanting to tour. So I went to them and said, hey, I've got my license. You can pay me just a commission of whatever we do, but I really want to learn this industry and I want to learn it in depth, And that's where I went to the best people I could find to do that. And normally if you say to somebody, hey, I'll work for free, they normally won't say no. I found in life, obviously if you're presentable and know what you're talking about and have, but that allowed me, because I had all this other income, that really allowed me to take pretty much a year really to just learn day in, day out, day in, day out, day in, day out without getting paid anything. On top of it, I'd already done the deals. I'd already worked on a lot of deals, but I just wanted to learn it a lot more in depth. And one of the guys I was working with did like huge like office, basically huge deals of like the co-working spaces. So he would find the space for the co-working spaces. Okay. So a lot of these leases that we're working on, they're huge leases, and they're very intricate with like, for example, one time we saw this little word written, which was compounding interest on, they basically had a compounding interest on, you'll find this interesting because, you know, like the second you heard compounding interest, you were like, oh, great, you know, but it was for the landlord. So it wasn't good because it was for us, the compounding interest. And he was showing me that this one word actually added about $1 million onto the term of the lease, right? That was hidden within it. So when I was taught to do, you know, work on LOIs or leases or anything, this was really life or death, you know, because these are huge, you know, one word here, there, or, you know, anywhere could have a massive, massive consequences. So then when I turned around and helped my friend get like a little retail strip, right, you know, is I'm looking at everything the same way I was taught to look at it, you know, and a lot of times I've been told by brokers, they're like, whoa, like this is only a small deal, you know, this is only a small deal. You don't have to look at it that way. And I'm like, well, I do, because it's not small deal to the person that's signing this lease, you know. So as I found that my mantra is I do every deal the same way I was trained to do every deal, which was, and I hate it when I hear, and I won't allow anybody to say at my company, this deal is only, you know, this deal is only, this deal is only, this deal is, and I hear brokers say it all the time. It absolutely pisses me off, you know, is, oh, it's only this, it's only that. It's not for that person, you know, it's their livelihood, it's their life, it's their, you know, it's a huge commitment that they're taking on. It could have massive, massive consequences in their life. So that's kind of an overall look at how I kind of like got into it. And so it was almost by chance in ways, but then the second I started, and I'd always had an idea that I wanted to be a broker from when I was doing the office space, and like, oh, I want to do this at some point. But I was like 22 or 23 at the time, and I was like just thinking about getting my broker's license and starting a company. It was like, oh, that's going to take 8-9 years, you know. When I was 22 or 23, I was like, how can I do it next week? Oh, that's not going to work because it's going to take so long to do. So as I kind of scrapped it from that age and then reapproached it, you know, 5, 6, 7 years later, where I really wish I would have stuck to it at that time, you know, from the get-go.
Yeah, well, I like how you kind of had that mantra that, or the mindset, I guess, that everybody is a unique person and they all need to be treated the same. I think that we at the firm have a similar mindset because, you know, in taxation, I could say, okay, well, it's just $5,000. Well, just $5,000, maybe no big deal to somebody, but like you said, it may be a huge deal to somebody else. And I think that just treating everybody with respect and trying to make sure they're taken care of and giving the best advice that you can give them in that moment and giving them your full attention and your full energy, I think is really something that is not only good for everybody involved, but also will come back around. That multiple times over, we've had clients or maybe potential clients that were just not a great fit, too small. But myself or one of the other partners just tries to give them as much information as we can just to be helpful. And then it's like, hey, you know, we may not be a good fit for you, but these are some things you need to know. These are things that probably apply to you. And it may be a smaller client for us, but for that person, you know, that's like you said, their livelihood. And it makes a huge difference for them. Yeah,
like I got dragged into a situation at my office where there was a friend of, and they're dealing with a different brokerage. I'm not even the broker. And obviously things are getting messed up on the deal. And they're like, hey, can you take a look at this, right? And then I immediately spend about 2.5 hours just ripping this thing apart because I can't not, you know, I can't not do that. If somebody shows it me, and he showed it me like slightly one time, and I was like, and I know myself, so I didn't want to get too deep into it. And then like the second I did, I was like, no, like this, that, just trying to help them out. But I think you can never lose in business doing that constantly, you know. And I think that comes from my grandfather. My Scottish grandfather was a doctor, and in Scotland or in England is you don't get paid a lot to be a doctor, you know, like because everything's free healthcare. So as he lived above his practice, and you know, as he just treated people his whole life, never made any money, But, so as I always looked at it like, wow, that's the great thing about, the United States in a lot of ways, is you can come here, you can help people, and you can help them in a good way. And as well, on top of it, so to me, a lot of the times, just the financial part of it is just a massive bonus on top of, being at a point now. I think once you get past survival mode and you're doing well, being at a point where you can do that and not have to worry about all these extra things, I think that for me was really where the business took flight and took off, was once I got to that point. Because I was like, oh, now I can just help people every day. This is great. And I can utilize my time, a lot more sparingly than when I was getting started.
Yeah. So it sounds like you started either right before or right around when COVID first happened.
So I started like 2 years before.
Okay, 2 years before.
Yeah.
So talk to me maybe about either before or right after COVID happened. How is like the commercial, specifically the leasing space, changed in that time frame?
So during COVID, I was working with that broker who was doing all the huge office spaces. So all the co-working spaces. He had maybe I think it was 40, 50 clients nationwide. So you can imagine what they're going through. Funnily enough, one of our clients was leasing space off of Facebook, so we're arguing with Facebook. They're not nice landlords. If anybody's got Facebook as a landlord, do not, and I'm not sure if you've seen, but he's purchasing a ton of land in and around those areas, and they're not the best landlords to deal with by any means. They were pretty brutal because we were having to go through every single person, right? And you don't get paid for this, by the way. You just have to go through and try and navigate these very difficult situations of, hey, nobody's paying rent. What are they doing here? And, so it was negotiating out of that stuff. After the fact is because a lot of the co-working spaces were not trying to take massive risks anymore, then these licensing agreements where they'd partner with the building rather than just lease started to pop up quite a bit more.
Okay.
And then all of the retail stopped, because you couldn't go anywhere. And I was actually working on a deal up at the shops at Legacy, where I foresaw just a ton of these spaces being empty. So because of and they have been for quite a while now, they're starting to pop back up. But from my event background, I was like, oh, these need to become event spaces and do private events and things like that. So I was coming up with creative ideas for I was going to my clients in the events world going, look, there's all these spaces that are empty. There's going to be a lot more private events here after COVID. This is, a huge opportunity that could be had here. But then what ended up happening is the second COVID stopped, which it did here in Texas a lot quicker than it did elsewhere, is the second it was not looked at as serious of a thing, is all of the restaurants flooded. Everybody went out, and I was predicting, I was like, the second this happens, it's going to be like the 1920s when Prohibition ended. Because now all of a sudden you can go out and do something that you couldn't do before, which was just be out in the world. And that happened. And then all the rental rates have been going up and up and up and up and up, coming to today where the economy's turned, or turning, depending on who you ask. I would argue that it's turned, because I see it firsthand from restaurants and things like that. That's where you always see it first, right? It's just the little things people stop spending on. It's just the rents have gone up the whole time because of this huge, crazy drive from the COVID times. And now I think it's starting to slow down, and now you're starting to see the ripple effects of people not going out as much and things like that. And it's affecting the people that have leased the places at the after COVID rates, because probably a year or two afterwards there was a bump, and then brokers and landlords are never like, oh, let's chill this thing out and maybe look at things a little bit more sensibly. Is the rates just continue to go up and up and up and up and up, and I think that's where the Dallas market is at the moment. And I think there are certain areas that can really, really sustain that, depending on the amount of spend that's going on within those buildings. But then there's other areas that are, closer to these areas that kind of have the same illusions of grandeur that can't, So there's areas that are struggling, this, that, and the other. But it really isn't a struggle of like of any actual struggle. I just think it's the bubble kind of cooling down a bit, and these spaces can still be leased at reasonable rates and have really good businesses in them and have really successful businesses. But for anybody looking at leasing space, like I always love it whenever it's a downturn market, because I feel like everything gets sensible. Whereas within a bigger, everybody probably saw trying to buy a house after COVID, right? I have a residential team. That part drove me insane, right? It's like, because people are buying things over evaluation and things like that just out of need and necessity on a fear-based decision, because of that fear base. I hate to ever make any decision based on fear, because it's normally it's normally the wrong one. So I feel like now looking at leasing spaces is a really good time. And even for buying homes at the minute, we find it's a really good time because everything's cooled off. People can make more sane, more sane decisions and really just make sure it's the right decision they want to make.
Yeah. So it sounds like, at least in the current space, that a lot of these restaurants specifically have they leased out spaces, and then they're starting to feel a little bit of that pinch, like you were saying.
Or they've closed down. A lot of them have closed.
They've closed down.
Yeah.
So is there an option other than just closing down for some of, like, maybe your restaurant clients or any client, not necessarily just a restaurant, that's feeling a pinch where they want to continue doing business, but they signed a lease that was unreasonable, and now they're to a point where they need to either negotiate or get some help? Is there something that they can do to talk with their landlord?
And that's just, it's just, I mean, we were doing this in COVID for all the office spaces, right? And these are just brutally truthful conversations that you have to have, and that's really what it is. I think a lot of the times with people in those spaces is they don't want to admit that they're in that trouble. And I would say 100% don't ever do that, right? This isn't
Is it like a pride thing?
Yeah, it's a pride thing. It's an ego thing. It could be an embarrassed thing. It could be, it's a personal thing, right? That nobody really wants to be in that situation. It's a horrible situation. It could have been due to them getting a place more expensive, or due to something that they didn't foresee, happening. But I would say to everybody, the way I look at a business space is this business space is there to get you money to take home and protect your family with. If it's not doing that, get rid of it, or downsize or argue to the death of it to try and change this situation, because it has one purpose and one purpose only, to bring you food on the table, or to bring you money for your family. That's what it's there for, So that's why it's a bit different on the commercial side to residential, you know.
So is there kind of an argument, because my brain always goes to numbers, because that's just who I am as a person. So is there kind of a argument for someone who is the lessee going to the landlord and saying, hey, like, we're not going to be able to sustain this rate.
Yeah.
So it's either we need to change, or you're going to need to find a new tenant. But then finding a new tenant has costs associated with that for the landlord. So is it that type of, like, hey, we're trying our best to meet up to our obligations, but this is also going to cost you money, landlord, so we need to find some middle ground? Is that kind of how it goes? Yeah,
exactly. And so that's where it comes back to doing it right first time, because the specific numbers, like, for example, it's around 6% with a restaurant. They should be spending 6% on their rent, of sales, you know. So I normally have, honest conversation with landlords and go, look, if the sales are there to support it, you can show me next door's sales, and if they're crushing it and next door's crushing it, and we can pay this. But if it doesn't support it, then we can't pay this. So the issue that a lot of people leasing these spaces get into is they say, I can afford this, my business is gonna do this. And then it doesn't, and they've already locked themselves in contractually, and then, verbally, to a point, like, where they feel like they've spoken a mistruth, which they have, So I think that's why it's difficult to go back and say, actually, I was completely wrong about my projections, because they presented a business plan and they presented, like, look at how great this business is going to be, and then it's doing 50% of that, So I think it has to be set up right unless there's been, special circumstances like COVID, is in that point it is, hey, you got your numbers wrong, and now you're dealing with the, with the repercussions of it. So there's not a massive amount of leverage there. So you kind of have to come, I wouldn't say begging, but very politely to a landlord saying, hey, here's why our numbers are wrong. Here's why this, that, and the other, because they've spent a lot of money to get you in the space also.
Right.
They may have helped you with build out. They may have, so I think that's why it's more of a difficult situation and can't be taken as lightly, because they've shown these numbers and they've presented their business in a way that it hasn't ended up doing, but is still in that difficult situation. You've got to have a drastic, change of something. So yeah, I mean, it's literally going, hey, we can't afford this based on this number. This is what we can afford. Can we do this? Can we do this? And a lot of the time, landlords are reasonable, or sometimes they can't. I was witnessing one where they bought a franchise. It was a horrible situation. Veteran bought a franchise, got sold. I tend to hate franchises a lot of the time, unless they're like an established, like really, really like well-known franchise. But sometimes you get a bit of, I would call them shysters, for lack of a better term, that start selling people on this dream of a franchise before the model's proven, specifically in like different areas. And, open this up here because we're doing great in this part of the country, open this up here because, and I've had quite a few in-depth arguments with franchise owners because I'm like, this isn't your risk because you're outsourcing all the risk onto them, and you also don't really have a proven model yet. And this gentleman had spent all this money on franchising fees and all this, that, and the other, and then it's to a point where the sales were so minimal that it's just never the equipment they told him to buy, because they're like, you have to have the best equipment to represent our brand. So he's like, yeah, sure, I'll go get the best equipment, And then at the point that I was introduced to him, is it's way too, the amount of money that's into it is never really going to come back out of it, So I think it's carefully getting into these situations is really the only solution, because once you're in them, they can hold you very liable. Is it depends on if you have a personal guarantee specifically, something like that. I always warn clients against them. I tend not to like to do them. Is just for those very reasons. So, and
for those who are listening, like kind of explain what's a personal guarantee. How does that
affect
somebody?
So as you can either guarantee on the business, so you can say, hey, this business is going to guarantee the lease, so any legal repercussions would be taken on the LLC, or there's the personal guarantee, which would obviously be taken on you personally.
Yeah, and that ties up some of their personal assets. So like even maybe it's their house or some of their personal savings or things like that would all be liable.
Exactly. So I see a lot of those deals where somebody's like, I got a whole personal guarantee here, and it's like, which broker allowed this deal? So even if you do have to do that, if you are a startup business, you can normally do reasonable things where you equate to the amount of risk that the landlord has, and then you can do like a guarantee for that amount, right? Rather than these amounts or certain monthly amounts. Like we'll give you like I saw one the other month, which was like, they're like, hey, we want 2 months notice and then a 3-month guarantee. So, and the rent was like, $13,000. So now they've got a risk of $36,000 rather than,
so it minimizes
$800,000, So that's how, so you can imagine the risk differentiation on those two things is absolutely massive.
Yeah. So it just goes back to all parties involved trying to be reasonable, because you trying to find a space for somebody who's looking to lease, like you understand that the landlords have to make money too.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, I'm not trying to just totally take everything out from under you, landlord, but at the same time, like it's not right to treat this person terribly.
Well, the way I look at it philosophically is really we're trying to find the most amount that this space can do.
Yeah.
The most amount of money it can make for everybody. Yeah. And if you're working with good operators or things like that, they know. And they're like, this space can only do this amount. And the good operators are right, because that's why they're good operators. So they're like, we can't pay more than this amount could I, some of my clients have multiple restaurants, 5, 6, 7 locations. They're like, of course I could pay that amount for it.
Yeah.
I could easily guarantee it with all my other restaurants, but that space is going to lose me money, and it's not worth me or not even lose me money. The profit margins, because food margins are around 20%, is so if you're paying 15% in rent,
right,
your whole margin's gone. 10%. So the numbers are so accurate. So I love working with good operators. So really what I do is I work really, really good operators that are very, experienced in doing this. And then a lot of the times, I'm seeing the way they think about spaces or things, like, oh, this is the patio space that you need, because then obviously once you've got all this patio space, you're normally not paying for patio space, and patio space is, going to be an extra money maker because you've got all this extra space that now you can utilize. And then when I work with startups, right, is I can lean on the knowledge I've acquired from working with operators. And I met with a landlord the other year, and I started talking about spaces, and he said, you don't sound anything like a broker. He's like, you sound like an operator. And I realized, because I had been operating events and and nightclubs and and bars and things like that, a lot of the time the rent was coming out of my margin. So I was learning to think like that from a young age. I'm looking at it going, yeah, I can rent any space in the city to do an event out of, but some of them, because of the price, don't make sense. You can't, like, that space isn't worth that because of that. So I think really when you're able to diagnose what a space is worth, actually, you're helping the landlord out more than anybody else around them, right? Because now they know that this space can be leased at this amount and be successful at this amount without them having to try and release it, or, Whereas the other strategy is just keep raising the rents, keep leasing to people, and then you get a new deal every time.
And then you got to pay for it every time.
Yeah, exactly. And you get paid for it every other time. So is so I think that's the sensible way to do anything is that way, because everybody's taking risk in the deal. And that's kind of because it is, really a partnership with the landlord. It is that they're involved in it if there are going to be issues, things like that. So then the landlord's really, really important, to you and your business. And I normally get a read off a landlord depending on, how they're being throughout the negotiations and things like that. And there's been many a times I've gone, I don't like this at all.
Just because of how the situation has gone.
Yeah, it's just you can tell that, like, this is going to be a difficult, because a lot of times you're dealing with, like, either an asset manager or there's a specific individual that's making that call on the other end. And if that person is extremely difficult, then the whole thing is going to be extremely difficult, regardless of how beautiful the space is. So it's like they can really, really make, life just extremely difficult, and they could crash your business, just from, there was one, the other week, we were asking for very simple things, very fair things, and they said, we're just not going to do this at all. The space is still empty, but.
So let me ask you this, Danny, because I always like to put, like, real practical advice when we're sitting down with guests and they're talking about things that we can have some good takeaways from. So you see the numbers all the time, and you kind of go through this process over and over and over again. If it's somebody who has a business and, like, this is their first time to ever lease a space ever, what's a good starting point? I mean, obviously talking with somebody like you is probably the best starting point, but what's stuff they can get together?
Yeah, it's really looking at monthly sales and yearly sales. So you'd start off, okay, what does my business do? And then on to what can my business afford. Before getting on this, I was talking to my business partner. He had a telecoms company that was doing $65 million a year, and he signed a lease in 2001 here in Dallas. He got $1 million lease, and then just as 2000 hit, the market crashed. So then he's struggling trying to get out of this lease that he just signed. They haven't even moved people in yet, So I think it's working backwards and going, okay, what does my business do yearly. On office spaces and things like that, you could maybe go up to 10%, somewhere around there. But
Is
even
10% kind of the cap regardless of business most of the time?
I mean, I would keep it there because do you really want to spend 15 to 20% of your sales on a lease?
Right.
Like once you actually ask somebody, like, do you care that much about having the nice, because once you work backwards from that, or would you like that money in your pocket to go have a nice vacation with,
Yeah.
So go buy yourself a nice house. So so I think really just because they haven't done that simple calculation and then they get the place and they're like, oh, we'll afford it or we'll grow into it. And then it ends up just eating at them how much they're actually spending. So, and it's a really simple formula. Like it's really just, it's not really that complicated, but I think it's just not taking that step a lot of the times is where people end up, and then it's around 6% with a restaurant, around 8% you're in amber, at 10% you're at the red, at 12% you're dead, the place will survive and your landlord will make money, but you won't, you'll be living on a 8%, so it's like, so I think is it's really just as simple as that. And then, on top of that, making sure that you've just got enough time to get it built out before your rent starts. That's another thing I hate seeing is I normally like to do variable start dates on when construction's complete. And this is because of COVID. So let's say you had a deal about to go through at the start of COVID, and then when all the wood stopped, right, and nobody could get materials and things like that, is those people legally were obligated to pay rent during those times. Whereas if it was a variable start date, then they wouldn't have to pay the rent until it was done.
So by variable, does that mean like certain contingencies have to be met before they start paying rent?
Yes. So I normally like to do it on a CO, so certificate of occupancy.
Okay.
So once they've got that, because you can get through this whole thing, and then, which has happened with the deal of mine before, the city of Dallas stalled it for 7 months just on permitting.
Yeah, so the space was ready. It just needed the permit.
Well, they couldn't get the permit to build.
Oh, okay.
So, and then after that is then you got to wait for a CO. So all of those things is all of the rent would have been, you would have to be paying rent this whole time. Yeah. So that's the other biggest one is you can never be paying rent if you're not operating. And so that's another huge mistake. Is that a friend of mine, and he brought me out to his place, and they've been paying $20,000 a month for 6 months. Trying to get it, and they're feeling bad because they told the landlord and they signed a contract saying we're going to be ready by this date. So you signed the contract, you should be ready by this date. You're at fault, as if you're not. So that's the other big one. Make sure you're not paying any rent when you're not operating, and like I said, it's when you say these things out loud, it seems super simple, but is these mistakes businesses are making every day. I see them making it, and then really it's looking at expenses. So there was one time we were doing a deal, I think it was down in San Antonio, and the landlord gave us a lease that we completely ripped up. We're like, we're just going to give you this lease back and give you a new lease, because this lease, there's no way anybody should ever sign this lease. Like, just because
that bad.
It was that bad. And then they come back and go, well, all of our tenants are signing it. And it's like, you're a retail strip with 4 tenants. Because it's not that,
not that many people.
Yeah, this isn't like a conglomerate here that we're dealing with, and so that's another thing there is whenever, like, the leases can literally be anything. They can write anything on them. They can have lawyers draft them up. There is from like Trek and stuff, but nobody really uses them, but there's like not set contracts. So they could just put anything in there. So I always tell people, like, look, finding space in Dallas is extremely easy. It's everywhere. But getting the right deal and then getting the right landlord with the right lease terms, that's the hard part. Because people always go, you think you can find me space? I'm like, yeah. It's like, yes, there's tons of space everywhere. But I think people from the outside always think that's going to be the difficult part, is like locating the space that they like. But it isn't. There'll normally be a few different options that you have. It's really just which deal is actually going to work for the business and make that, make you successful within that business.
Gotcha. So it sounds like, start with the numbers. That's the big thing. Definitely talk with somebody like you to make sure that there's certain things put in place that are protecting you as the lessee. anything else that somebody should be aware of when they're starting?
Well, yeah. I advise every client I ever have to have a lawyer. Is it's going to cost you, maybe on the smaller leases, maybe like $1,000 or $2,000. Even on my wife's deals, my wife has commercial space. I get a lawyer involved in that just to overlook everything that I'm. So a lot of my time I'm spent talking with lawyers back and forward.
Yeah.
Just I'd advise everybody to do that because they're going to be as harshly looking at it as I am.
Specifically a real estate attorney?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. So ideally very experienced on the commercial side. I have a few that I work with that I recommend if people need that.
Yeah.
But I think the thing is even if you're not going to use a broker, get the attorney involved like 100% every time because they'll find that, as I was saying to you earlier, that one word, the compounding word that's going to make it, this, that, and the other or things, And I've seen mistakes on leases. Like I've noticed it around all the right, and been like, hey, this is a mistake here. And it's had very large consequences on the deal just from a simple wording mistake. So that, I think, is the nuances of and what I love about commercial real estate is because it's very high stakes on very small things.
Yeah.
So it's like, and these things are tiny. People are like, oh, it's only this, don't worry about it. But going back to what I was saying earlier is, it's only is not a word that's in the dictionary at my brokerage. I would throw somebody out the window for so. I'm not sure if I can say that on a podcast, but I would. It's like, but they'd be immediately fired for using those, that sort of terminology. Is it's only this or it's only something small.
Yeah.
Is because, like I said, is that can have massive. So yeah, that's really is run the numbers, make sure that you're not paying any rent if you can't be operating. That's another big one. Have reasonable conversations with landlord about that, and then just get a lawyer to look over every line of that contract, because that's normally what my day-to-day is talking with the lawyers, going, we can go for, because I get a read off the landlord and go, okay, this landlord, we're okay doing this, that, and that's really where the points of contention are between the lawyer. But to be fair to the lawyers, lawyers are normally really good talking to each other because they all know, and they're like, yeah, that's fair, that's not.
Yeah.
So once you start doing that, is that's where I think people get themselves into trouble. Is they've got their landlord's written lease, they sign the lease like, oh, it's a standardized lease. It's not. You don't know their attorney. You don't know. You don't know who could have written that and what their intentions were, and you hope they're good. And a lot of the times they are. They're fair leases and things like that. But then also a good amount of times they're not, or they're just trying to put all the liability on you. Right, and hold you to I had one we like to always, so like your central area maintenance. Mm-hmm. So we have a cap on controllable expenses. So is let's say these are expenses that you can control, like there's uncontrollable expenses like taxes.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a cap, so let's say I was a vicious landlord and you leased this space off of me, right?
Yeah.
I could say, I could hire my idiot son, pay him $200,000 a year, and then raise everybody's rent based on my expenses have gone up.
Oh,
because there's no cap on my expenses. Or I could turn around and gold plate. These are extreme examples, obviously, but and I've never seen these done, but you could, theory could, There was one which is an actual example. They renovated the gym, they renovated everything, and then they came back to my clients and said, and I had 3 clients in the building, and they said, "Oh, your rent's been raised by $1,000 because of the expenses have gone up." And so they call me panicking, like, what do we do in this situation? And I said, kindly tell them, F off, read the lease, And so what had happened in this specific scenario is new owners had bought the building. They hadn't looked through every lease. So my guys were good, and they didn't raise they couldn't, because the lease said they couldn't. But all the other leases, they may have looked through 3 or 4 leases and were like, oh, yeah, this is a building that's done this set lease, and now we can do this. And then luckily, the one guy was actually trying to get out of the building, and they were able to get out of the building because of that. He needed, it was either a smaller or bigger space, but he was switching spaces.
Yeah.
And then because of this, they let him out very, very quickly, because they needed that higher price to match the other prices. So it just created like an awkward lease, which I don't necessarily think was fair. It's kind of like an HOA, right? They're only going to raise their prices. They're never going to go down. But in these buildings, I think it was anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 a month it was changing their leases by. So these weren't small amounts, you know. So that's another thing to be.
We've talked a lot about the financial side of things, but is there anything within leases that's important from like an operations type thing where somebody who's looking to lease a space out, they need to have certain requirements of a landlord so that they can actually run a business so that maybe the building's kept up with or there's not issues?
Yeah, I think parking. So normally something we was asked for is like, can you please tell us all your parking? So is when we come in for a deal, we go, can you please tell us all your parking? Can you please tell us, all your operating expenses, which I know is financial, I'm taking you back, but that's an important one.
Yeah.
Signage on the building, what signage can we have? As well on top of that is HVAC. HVAC's a big one, so a lot of the landlords try and put these HVAC systems. I mean, you can clean the vents and stuff like that, but if somebody's trying to put a $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 system on you, that's it's their building. So that's another one as well. That's a huge one.
So what's the importance of that to like minimize the cost of it, or is it like a issue from where it's located in the building?
Yes. So the issue is you have to pay for it if it breaks. Where they'll normally start a lot of their leases, and then you can negotiate back and forward on there. So normally when I come in with an offer, I say, hey, we're not going to take care of any of your HVAC. And then they'll be like, well, can you take care of maintenance? Yeah, okay, we can take care of maintenance, but we're not. If the system goes out, which could be, very, very expensive, we can't. That's not fair for us to take care of it. We've just gotten the space,
It's a lot less risk to handle the maintenance versus the cost of that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Is another one's like, for example, a building. We have a building that we lease that has an elevator in it. Mm-hmm. Now, if that elevator breaks, that's $100,000. So who's responsible for the elevator will pay for the maintenance and the upkeep, right? Because they say it's not fair if you just abuse the elevator. Yeah, 100% agree, So it's like, I feel like always like calmer heads prevail with all this stuff to where it's like, that makes sense going this way. So I think a lot of it's really just the functionality of the business, water pipes and things like that you don't want to be responsible for.
Is there anything that you can put in a lease that says, like, let's take the elevator, for example, that says, like, the landlord is required to fix the elevator within a certain extent of time, or like... You can put stuff like that in a lease?
Exactly. Yeah, is to say this is operationally, it can't upset operations and things like that. Now, elevators are difficult because there's only a few like elevator parts companies. So whenever an elevator, that's why everybody always complains about elevators, is because, and it's really, I found out it was like backed up because the companies that make the parts, there's only a few of them in Texas and they take forever to get there. Yeah. So, but yes, you can say no disturbance of business and things like that. So any sort of disturbance of business, those are obviously huge things. Like if there was a flood within the building or things like that, those things have to be repaired within a certain amount of times. And
you put contingencies in the lease that says you're not required to pay if like certain things happen, kind of stuff like that.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah. So it'd be landlord's responsible for this, and then that's what you'd be arguing back and forward on. Normally it's like, okay, it's done within this amount of time, but you take care of this and we'll take care of that. So it normally ends up being something fair, for both parties. But if you don't say anything, if you just sign that lease, it's like, oh no, you take care of this as if it happens. And another one is called like the indemnification. So every landlord has an indemnification to say they're immediately indemnified if anything happens in the building. Mm-hmm. Which we say, yeah, that's fine. Can you indemnify us also?
Mm. So it's not even putting more risk on the landlord. It's just helping out the tenant itself.
Yeah.
It helps both of them.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying, is it's not really putting more risk there, but every lease I normally look at says, hey, the landlord's completely indemnified from everything. So we just call it double, just do a double indemnification, like add it for us also. help us out, so we don't, but it's like little stuff like that, it's that's probably not going to come up. It's tiny, it's the chances of that are very, very rare. But I do get calls, which is like, oh, hey, that funny little thing that it was like, and now it's popped up, and it's like, yeah, that's what those things are for, is the what if kind of scenarios, and because those happen, and those are really, really important to protect yourself on, because you don't want to be having to pay for everything, and that's, I think, is besides the lease, and then with rent raises and any of the taxes raising and things like that. I mean, your rent's always going to go up. There's no way it's going. It's like it's pretty much always going to happen that way. But yeah. So I think it's just going through it with a fine-tooth comb and making sure, and that's obviously where the where the lawyers are extremely important. I'm learning from them every day, going like, hey, they can't do this or they can't do that. And the amount of stuff, like they just say some stuff is like, they're like, that's just illegal. Like, they're like, that is just illegal. Like what they've put here, like this is violating this Texas law, that Texas law, and that Texas law. But that's in a lease that you're going to sign. So sometimes it's not even worth fighting on that point, because if it did go to court, they'd be like, that's illegal,
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm always, exactly. So I'm always learning stuff like that. But there's a crazy thing to think that there's leases, I've seen them out there with just illegal statements in that can't even be said. Any lawyer would look at it and be like, but the person signing the lease, would obviously wouldn't be able to. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to tell before doing this for a living,
So one of the other things that I know comes about a lot whenever you're talking about leasing and signing a lease is like, a lease is not just signing an agreed upon amount to pay on a monthly basis. There's a lot more that goes into a lease. Some of those is kind of like, okay, you mentioned improvements earlier to a space.
Yeah.
It comes down to, okay, what improvements are going on and like who's paying for what. So talk to me about like some of the negotiations that you can do if you're looking to get into a space to have the landlord help pay for some of that stuff or some of the stuff that typically a tenant would pay for.
Yeah, and so that's like what's fair, right? So I think like structural stuff that's going to improve the building, I always think that's fair. Finished stuff, I tend to lean towards, right? Because you've got a business owner that wants like certain finishes and certain upgrades and, this, that, and the other, where I think that's, is, and this is what I'm saying, I sit very fair on these, because I'm having conversation with my guy going like, look, yeah, that's great. We had a guy that was requesting marble flooring, and it's like, I don't really think that's, if you want marble specific, is like, and you want these excessive things, that's got to be on you. But I think like structural stuff, like grease traps and, like things that are going to actually make the business work. And it depends what state you get it in, right? If it's brand new shell state, I tend not to be the biggest fan of those just because there's so much build out. A lot of the deals I do are normally, because there's a lot of them, is the second gen restaurants. So it's actually a really good deal for both parties, because the landlord needs to invest less in order to have it built out, because they've already done that once before. And then the tenant gets a ton of equipment, and a ton of operational stuff that they would normally have to pay for. So I've seen upwards of $200,000-$400,000 worth of equipment that you inherit with the lease. So these things become assets,
and the landlord doesn't really have a use for it unless it's a restaurant that's going to use it anyway.
Exactly. So that's where you can get a really, really good deal, because if you can get a good price on rent, right, is you can get a little bit for a build out, help with some of the structural things, and then you can get all of this equipment. And, I've seen speakers, I've seen, just crazy amounts. We saw one the other day with one of the wood fire burning for the pizza. Yeah. Like the wood fire, they're extremely expensive, right? Yeah. And that just comes with that space, So it's like an extra perk of an add-on. So that is on the build out side. I feel like, yes, landlords should take care of structural stuff, or if a space needs this to operate, but sometimes I think people go in with like, oh, I want this, and they go into it kind of like a home builder, like this is my wish list. And I'm like, well, that's not fair. It's like that really doesn't make any sense what you're asking for there. So I think is it has to be balanced. But yes, as if you're going into new space that they're going to have to build out that stuff, then they should be paying a good portion, going
They
more,
being the landlord.
yes, going more towards the majority, because they were going to have to do it anyway. Somebody's going to have to do it,
Yeah.
Or they can turn around and give, as a deal we do a lot is like free rent once they're open in order for them to make the money back of the construction. So that's another thing that you can do. Let's say, but like a longer term, like 6, 12. I was working on a deal with, like close to 10 months because it depends on what's fair, right? This specific landlord doesn't have a ton of cash to shell out because of their situation, right?
Yeah.
So they go, okay, we understand the situation. Let's my client can pay for the build out, but they want this, they want to make their money back. They can front the money, but they'd like to make it back, for improving your space. And normally they're like, okay, that's fair. So is a lot of these conversations are never normally like crazy battles back and forward. It's just always a conversation of like, what's fair, this is fair, that's fair, this is fair, that's fair. So a lot of my day-to-day, I think, which I love, is just coming up with, okay, what do we think's fair here?
Yeah.
Rather than like a crazy, battle of, oh, we need to get this from them and we need to, because I'd never want to involve myself in any deal like that anyway, kind of that somebody's brutally taken advantage of either way. Is like, I wouldn't want it because it's a very small city. There's a lot of people doing business, but then again, there's not, so you never really want to be a part of a deal that just, for whichever way, or I would never want to be, I know people who have been, and, but that's on them, so, but I wouldn't want to, so I think, you can always shift as if it's on the dollar amount. You can always shift on 3 months and kind of go back and forward depending on how they want to structure it.
Yeah, I got you. Before we run out of time, I want to cover maybe some of the things that are fundamental beliefs, I think, to who you are. Some stuff that you have on the website, and it plays into a lot of what you were talking about anyway. One of the things that you have on there is you couldn't pay me to do the wrong thing, or to be brutal, screw you, I wouldn't sell a bad home, apartment, or commercial space to anyone. Why do you have that on the website, and why is it important?
So it started off as an argument. so that's what happened there, is because we're like, there's so many realtors and there's so many, and that was actually F you over before, calmer minds prevailed. And we were like, okay, well, what? Like, we were coming up with, everybody has something that makes them stand out. And, my business partner, I have a business mentor who was just pushing me one day, annoying the living hell out of me with this. And he's like, just give me a line that says why you're different to every other broker. Just give me something. And I'm like, but essentially you're not, right? You're all doing the same job and this, that. And so this is the argument we're going back and forward with. And then he's like, but what makes you different? What makes you different? And he probably asked me this like 8 times in a row. And I was like, basically, I wouldn't you over, like I would not do that. And he goes, I know. He goes, I know that because I know you. Now he's like, put that into words and put it on the website. And I'm like, I don't think I can put that into words and put it on the website. He goes, but if you could, how would you do that? How would you put that in there? So that's where we structured that, is really, he goes, because that's you. And he goes, that's the essence of you and that's how you are. And he goes, and that's what sets you apart. Not the, yes, everybody does the same job, but he goes, that to me, and he goes, I know you well, and I know you would do that. I know you'd lose a deal before, putting somebody in a bad situation. You'd not make the money from it. So that's where that's where that came from.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of goes back to what you've said a lot about all of these topics in general. Sometimes things that seem like common sense, such as like just trying to do the right thing, people probably think that most of their brokers who are trying to help them are always trying to do the right thing. Maybe what seems like common sense in doing that is not necessarily the case.
Yeah, no. That definitely is just because I feel like I get it. Everybody's out there trying to make money, and people are in different, So it's like I get where people are coming from, but I feel like whenever you find tension in a deal, I can always tell when there's tension that somebody's trying to make something happen, and the reason they're normally trying to make something happen is for a monetary gain.
Yeah.
So I find that it makes the deal go through smoother as well, as if you're honestly detached from the outcome, and you're like, I'm just going to do my best and be as honest as I can and say, hey, this is the way it should be structured that's fair. And if you don't want a fair deal, then we'll leave it, and we're comfortable walking away. And I'm fortunate enough to have clients who are like, yeah, no, I agree with that, and they're like, okay, but most people are going to agree with that when it comes to them. They don't want to get themselves into a lease that they don't think's fair, and a lot of times is a guy was asking me, I told him to walk away from 2 landlords already. And he's like, are we going to find? So I joked that a lot of the times I'm the worst broker ever because I'm talking people out of stuff more than into stuff, I'm like, maybe let's not do this. And I'm very risk adverse as well. So I'm like, I don't like this. So the majority of my conversations are more so like, I don't like this, or I'm worried about this, or I don't like this part of it, rather than like, oh, hey, look at these beautiful chandeliers that you could get in this restaurant space, and imagine how much business you could do here. It's less of that and more of the, probably what you do on a day-to-day basis, which is more of the analytical side, which I think is kind of more surprising to most people looking at the industry from the outside in,
Yeah. And then the other thing that I saw that's kind of in the same wheelhouse here, you had on your website, it says, lastly, I know we are not always going to get it 100% right, and if for any reason you're not happy with the level of service you receive or at any stage of the process, I want to hear from you. I think that a lot of
and it's got my phone number.
It does. It has your name and phone number on there.
That was another argument.
Yeah, I think a lot of founders take things very personal when it comes to their business. And to me, that's what that statement says about you. That you take your business very personal, and you want it to be done right. And if it's not, you want to know. Why did you put it on there?
So there was, my business mentor was telling me, he goes, there was a guy that had a security,
like an ADP?
Yeah, no, not an ADP, like a personal security, right?
Oh, okay.
And so he put his social security number on a billboard and said, hack me, And so he put it on the website everywhere and just said, there's my social security number. My software's so good that you can hack me at any point if you have the capability.
Okay.
So we were looking at it and we were like, okay, how do you guarantee excellent service? There's my number. Call me with anything. And if I get that call, right, all my agents know what I'm like. If I get that call, it could be their last day.
Have you gotten that call before?
Never had that call. Thankfully, it'd be a bad day at the office that day. I've never had that call because we're training the agents very well every day also. So we're doing everything in my life in order to protect myself from that call, which is exactly what the guy with the security software is doing, right? Is the background workings to make him able to do that is what we wanted to show very, very quickly, is like, I believe in this company so much that you can call me with anything because you will not be able to call me with anything, you know? And so, and we've done funnily enough, we've done over 1,000 transactions.
Yeah.
So it's not a small amount, which sounds simple and straightforward, just, doing the right thing every time, but can be difficult on a day-to-day basis,
Yeah. So, Danny, we're running low on time here, but we like to end with maybe a couple fun questions and then kind of some general advice. So, what's one of the best places to lease in Dallas right now, like areas?
Well, obviously everything that's going on with like Knox Henderson, but the prices are crazy, are crazy at the moment. But I see everything kind of moving in that direction. We're doing a lot of stuff over in Trinity Groves. You're seeing a lot of kind of like overspill of the city. So I think places like that, wherever you're seeing a lot of development and things going on, our whole concept over in Trinity Groves is to build it into an entertainment district because the city doesn't have one. I initially was looking at like the West End to do stuff like that in, because I've always liked the West End. I think it used to have such a cool atmosphere. But what I think is cool and what we're doing over in Trinity Groves is is you can get together and get with people that you believe in their vision and create cool parts of the city. You know, it's like, it's not a huge city. Like whenever people say this area, that area in Dallas, I always laugh because I drive people around when they come here and we do the whole city tour within about 12 minutes, you know? And so they're like, Arts District, this district, that district. And I'm like, it's all downtown, you know? And like people get so annoyed when I say that. I'm like, it pretty much all is, you know? It's like, obviously you got your different pockets of areas, but to me, it's like if you look at, say, like London, New York, Chicago, right, there's not, you know, so I think people get overwhelmed with the thinking of different areas. But people in Dallas, they go out in all the areas, you know, so I think as long as you're close enough for proximity, like we have lovely restaurants in the, you know, the Arts District now, you know, and they've been there, or sorry, the Design District, which, you know, just used to be all design play, you know, so it's like people will drive and Uber anywhere kind of around Dallas. So I think it's really the place where you're going to get the better deal that isn't on a bad area, you know, that's kind of an up and coming area, seems to be where all the business is going at the moment. So I think look on those kind of outskirts.
Yeah, that's good to know. So before we wrap up, for anybody who is looking to lease out commercial space, either as a landlord or a tenant, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, is 469-847-3753.
It's on the website.
Yeah,
so.
I know, exactly, yeah. I was about to say go on the website, and then I was like, why even add an extra step? Yeah, just give me a call. I'd love to help anybody out. And like I said, really doesn't matter how small of a transaction it is. I had a guy call me the other day and he's like, Danny, I know I'm not a big customer. I'm like, shut up. Like, your business is cool. Like, he has this really cool business? And I'm like, it's not about that. Like, I enjoy the business aspect of it. So even if it's, hey, you don't need a space, which I've done to a lot of people, is like, we had this like AI company that was like building gym software, and it's like, develop the AI first, you know, like don't get yourself a warehouse and try and make it work and have these huge overheads. So I think really as anybody who just wants to talk to another entrepreneur that's going to like be like, this is maybe not the best way to go about it, you know, or this is, you know, you don't need this just yet. And really, but the advice of like, hey, the point in which you do, yes, this makes sense. But a lot of the times people just look at spaces a little bit before they're, you know, fully ready. Yeah. But as if we think they are, we can help them through that whole process. And then if not, at least we'll let you know, like, hey, we don't think you need this big of an office space for that, or you can get by with. I was talking to this company, which was like a medical company that needed like for like mental health stuff. And then they need an office, but they need to get licensed and all the licensing stuff. So we're coming up with this cool situation where they rent like a tiny office in order to get all the license in. Once they've got the license in, they can expand. But really, we need a landlord that's willing to do that, right? And for a broker, that's a stupid deal to do. Like the brokers listen to this and be like, why would you even have that conversation? I'm like, I like the business, I like the people, I help them out. And, you know, if something does come of it where, you know, they open up quite a few of these, then you've got a client for life, you know? So like we're willing to invest in people from day one, and that's kind of what I'm doing daily, you know?
And if they want to look you up online, how do they find like your specific team?
Yeah, so amazingbrokerage.com or you know, Danny.Kelman on Instagram, or you know, I'm on all the social medias or whatnot. YouTube's Amazing Brokerage. We're about to launch video playlists on the commercial side. We have a bunch on like the residential side, but I've been filming for a lot of stuff there. So really, just those would probably be the best ways.
Yeah, and we'll tag you on all that stuff so people can find you a little easier. And then the last thing that I'd like to leave people with is just for entrepreneurs, anybody that's thinking about getting into it or just maybe on their entrepreneurial journey, what's the best general advice you could give them?
So I always joke, 'cause people are like, when did you decide to become an entrepreneur? And I was like, well, I was pretty unemployable and I like nice things, you know? And I feel like for me is I can't not, you know, I just cannot not do it. It's like my wife laughs because we'll hit like a record month or something. Can I just start changing things or switching things or tweaking with things? Because it's not about the monetary amount. It's about the journey of doing the said thing. So the first thing I'd say is just look at yourself honestly and go, is this something I can't not do, right? Like we were discussing before, my brother's a professional soccer player. He can't not play soccer. You put a ball around him, he's play, you know, so it's like, that's how I feel about business. So I think first and foremost is being, you know, honest with yourself and going, is this something that you really, really want to do? or is this something that you just want to make money from? That's a cool trend at the moment. Is I was a quote entrepreneur before they called them entrepreneurs. I hate the word. It's a French word, you know, like I was a business owner then, or a business person, or, you know, but now it's a massive trend. But I'd say, yeah, just be certain it's something you can't not do. And then if it's something that you can't not do, just do it until it works, you know. And that's really because you fail a million times over, as I have, you know, and you'll fail kind of in every different way. But that's part of it, and I'm not going to stop failing. You know, I'm going to keep pushing stuff and keep learning stuff and keep tweaking stuff, and then working on different projects, bigger projects, smaller projects, you know. And it's just like, I feel like that's the joy of it. And if you get joy out of it, then, you know, don't ever stop doing it, and really just, but then also understand that it's going to just be getting punched in the face every day of your life for the rest of your life. And then when you're not getting punched in the face, you're going to find new ways to get punched in the face, because you're going to feel off, because you're like, how is this not going the way I'm used to it going? So that'd be my advice. I'm not certain if that's advice or caution. You know?
Well, Danny, I really appreciate you coming on.
I appreciate you.
I appreciate that you really care about the people and what's best for them. So we will definitely be sharing everything and look forward to doing business together.
Oh, perfect. Can't wait.